Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Took last week off after the season ended, but we're back at it here on a Friday. Plenty to discuss in the world of IU basketball, most of it surrounding the transfer portal. Tony Adragna, he's on Twitter at Coach Adragna, and he's also the author of a lot of really good film work on Twitter and in the Assembly Call community. Tony, welcome back to Podcast on the Brink. Good to talk to you.
Hey, Alex. Always good to be here on Podcast on the Brink, and excited to talk some portal and whatnot here.
What's just your general opinion on this whole change and kind of how fans and us in the media kind of follow the sport now? It feels now that we're kind of in the thick of it, I feel like last couple of years were maybe the first few experiences. Now there's over, I think, 1,200 guys in the portal. You're breaking down video of a lot of guys that probably didn't see throughout the season. I think on one hand, my opinion, it's been great for like interest in college basketball once the season ends. Usually it's, there's a little bit about the live periods coming up in April and recruiting. But I feel like people aren't even really talking about that now anymore. It's all portal stuff and wondering like how the roster is going to be built. On the other hand, I don't necessarily think probably coaches love the fact that they're having to pretty much grind here now continuously throughout the month of April, and then maybe even into May, into June, to fill out their rosters this season. Just what's been your perspective on this and kind of how it's changed the sport and how we follow it?
Sure. It's been interesting because, it all kind of coincided as well with NIL kind of coming afloat. So that like adds another aspect where, some guys are going into the portal to kind of see what their value is. And then, maybe they'll return back or they'll go elsewhere. We saw it front and center last season with Nigel Pack. Seemed like maybe he was a Purdue lean, and Miami comes in. I think it was Ruiz, all of a sudden details of that deal got leaked, and it was like, oh man, like this is real. I love it from a player perspective that, it sort of somewhat flips the balance and gives players an opportunity if they're not in a good situation, lie to in recruiting. Like, the number one rule of recruiting sometimes is lie. And, I'm not saying Matt Painter lied to Coffin Wren, but, he was kind of sold on being a 3. And then this season he played back up 5 minutes. And so guys like that end up in a situation that's not good for them. And not saying, I shouldn't say not good for them with TKR, because that's totally on him. I don't know that for a fact, but guys that end up in a situation that's not good are able to do that. Guys that possibly developed late, are able to kind of showcase their skills at a Power 5, Power 6 level. But on the flip side, it's a lot. There's, like you said, there's 1,200 guys in the portal. I think there's 7,000 guys in all of college basketball. So you're talking about a hefty, almost like 20% of the college basketball in the portal currently, which is crazy. And, I've gotten some comments from people that are like, the mid majors are like a farm system for high majors and things like that. People feel that way. It's tough. Change. Nobody likes change. And, you're gone are the days of like building a team probably and following them for 4 years. And you feel like a connection to all of those guys. Like, you're going to have 4-year guys stay at a program, certainly. But, to have like no transfers out is just not a thing anymore. Like, guys, the flip side of, like I said, guys that aren't in good situations leave. Some guys that just aren't patient leave and may end up in bad situations again. So it's a lot. What I don't like about it is, the same with any sort of recruiting, is other people get involved. You've got AAU coaches and handlers and things like that kind of get put back in the mix and sometimes aren't making the best decisions for the player at hand. So I don't like that side of it, but that's recruiting in general. From a coaching perspective, you hit it on the head. Like, they got to grind even more now. And that's, to me, as a fan, like you said, I don't even like care about the live periods anymore. Like it's like what are you going to do unless you're getting a 5-star prospect that's going to contribute right away for your team? It's like when you're in the portal, like those are guys that you're looking to contribute right away, and that's who's going to like step up the next season. Whereas, high school recruiting, you look at like the Caleb Banks of the world and the CJ Guns of the world, like those guys take time to develop to turn into like contributors on a Power 6 level, and you kind of almost lose interest in that. So super long-winded way of me saying like it's changed. I don't mind it, but it definitely is different.
Yeah, obviously there's a ton of interest in it, like in the community. I know it assembly call and same thing on the inside the hall community that we have. There's been like a couple of comments. People have said like, well, IU's in this position that they have to hit the portal so hard because they didn't get the job done with recruiting in the 2023 class. And I'm thinking to myself, like a comment like that is like, would you rather have a situation where you have like 5 or 6 freshmen coming in next season, or would you rather have like 2 freshmen and then go get 3 or 4 grown men that can come in and like play right away? I don't think in the future you're going to see too many situations other than, what Kentucky's obviously doing it next season where they're bringing in a bunch of 5-star kids, 4 or 5 kids that are ranked in the top 20, 25. But I think for the most part, most programs are going to bring in a couple freshmen and then supplement that with portal guys. And I actually think you have a better chance to be successful that way, because if you are bringing in 4 or 5 kids that are freshmen, you're probably not going to be very good unless they're elite players. And second, with the portal, you have a chance to lose guys after a year anyway. So why not bring in a player that's only going to be there for 1 or 2 years, maybe get the best of that player, and then kind of have to flip your roster over every season? That's kind of how I'm looking at least moving forward.
Yeah, and you see how guys contribute on the college level, because even at a mid-major or low-major level, it is a huge step up from anything those guys have, like freshmen coming in, have seen before on a night-in, night-out basis. So you're able to kind of look and see at a large landscape of players, all right, who contributed at the college level versus, like you said, freshmen. You've got high-level AAU and things like that where they play against better players, but it's nothing like the grind of college basketball and guys actually having scouting reports against you and trying to take away your strengths and things like that. So it's super interesting. Like you said, you're not going to have like this loyalty to guys as much as you probably once did. I think the Trace Jackson Davises of the world are few and far between moving forward. And, but that's, you kind of got to adapt or get left behind. And I think what we're seeing is IU adapting to this. And when you look at the Final Four this season, like you said, a lot of grown men, guys that were in the portal, guys that are 22, 23 years old. That kind of looks like the recipe to be able to be successful in March as it currently stands. And I think Indiana's doing a good job currently on who it's going after to kind of make their teams look like that.
Ball State transfer Payton Sparks was the first kind of portal pickup, obviously, this spring for Indiana. Last year, I think, was a little bit different too, because Indiana had so many guys coming back. They didn't have to really dig into the portal. So this is really, for IU fans, the first experience of probably going to need 3 or 4 guys from the portal. But Sparks, in your opinion, obviously had good numbers last year in the MAC. People say, well, that's just the MAC, but don't forget Indiana played Kent State in the tournament, and that was a well-contested game. They were a solid team. Ball State at one point, I think last year, beat them pretty handily. Payton Sparks, obviously a capable player. On film, when you look at him, how does he project, I guess, at the Big Ten level, and what maybe are some of the strengths and weaknesses you see in his game?
Sure. He's very skilled. He's got great feet. He can score with his back to the basket, and he's got a frame that can compete in the Big Ten. I think what Mike Woodson has to do, and what I think he is doing, is you certainly have to build a team to compete in the Big Ten to be able to get to March. And you also have to have a team that's built to make a run in March. And that's a tough balance when you think about the vast difference in Big Ten play versus, where March basketball is heading. But with that said, I think Payton Sparks is a piece that's going to help you get to March through that grind of the Big Ten. I don't foresee him being, playing starter minutes or anything of that sort, but I think he's a very viable backup big. a kid that wants to be there. Has mentioned this was his dream school. I think that all plays a part, and having depth in the front court is not bad. Especially when, as it currently stands, Indiana's front court is Malik Renew, a guy that had one of the highest foul rates in the country last season. So having that depth is certainly necessary. And so with Sparks, like I said, he's got great feet. He can score down low. He can compete in the post. Guys that, like, you talk about guarding, like the Zach Edey's of the world. He's got a big enough frame to at least stop him from getting directly to the rim, things like that. So I think that's all important. In terms of areas of opportunity, did not shoot well from the free throw line in his sophomore campaign. I think was like 55%, was 70% the year prior. So to me, it's more of a confidence thing probably than mechanics. And so I think that's something that could be fixed in time. And then, he's a below the rim player for the most part. He's not going to wow you with his athleticism or anything like that. But overall, I think he's great depth to add to the front court, and I think it's a positive addition for Indiana.
Yeah, I think the way you have to look at him is he's basically taking over the spot that was vacated by Logan Duncombe, right? He's got a couple of years left. Same thing would have been the case with Duncombe. We didn't really get to see what Duncombe was going to be able to do at this level. It was clear that it wasn't going to work out. So going out and getting a player who has experience playing college basketball, being productive, as you mentioned, probably a backup player, but he's it's not bad to have a guy coming off the bench that can be that productive. So I think that's the way you have to look at him. Two guys that maybe, obviously in play for Indiana, both currently on visits on campus right now as we record this on Friday morning. Chris Ledlum, the transfer from Harvard, and Khalil Ware, the former five-star big man who's from North Little Rock, Arkansas, spent last season at Oregon. I think a lot of people thought going into the season had a chance to be a lottery pick, maybe didn't have the role there that many expected, and he's departing after one season, and Indiana's done a really good job now getting him on campus, and we'll see kind of how things progress with his recruitment here. What, just on those two guys, how do you envision those guys fitting in at whatever program they land at? Specifically, if they do come to Indiana, to me, Ledlum seems more like a 3-4. I don't know if you want to play him at the 3, depending on how you're going to play. And then Ware, obviously, it seems like he can play the 4 or the 5 with his ability to step out to the perimeter. I know you did pretty comprehensive breakdowns of both those guys on Twitter. If anybody wants to go check those out, I encourage you to do so. But just curious, kind of your high-level thoughts on both of those players right now.
With Ware, I kind of look at him as like a 4 offensively and a 5 defensively. Much more of a rim protector defensively. One of the higher block rates in the country last season. That kind of, pretty much rivaled where Trace Jackson Davis was at in terms of block rate. Has tremendous length. He's over 7 foot or feet. So obviously that's important and huge. No pun intended. And he's very skilled for his height. I hesitate to make comparisons, especially of this nature, but I was texting with Jared Morris today, and I've texted some buddies this, like, he has a little bit of a Wembanyama feel to him, like the way he moves. Now, I'm not saying he's anywhere near the skill level or anything of that sort, but just the length and the height and the way he plays the game is similar. And I'll kind of leave it at that because I don't want to post it over Twitter. Tony Adragna said that where is Wembanyama, because that's not what I'm saying. But he can step out, he can stretch the floor. He's tremendous in ball screens. If Xavier does get that waiver cleared, I see ball screen actions with Xavier, and where Xavier can essentially attack a big and then can lob it up anywhere near the rim, and Ware's going to be able to go get it and finish. You mentioned he can step out and shoot the 3. I think he was 27% last season, so nothing to write home about. But when you've got a 5 that can stretch the floor and at least keep the defense honest, that's big. And a guy that can attack. Things that have been said about him is that his motor was tough to get going. Dana Altman twice last season called him out publicly, and which I don't think is necessarily fair. I watched a lot of film on him, and something else I compared him to, not skill wise, but the way he approaches the game is like a Christian Watford. You could watch Watford play and think like he's not trying, but he is. He's just smooth and methodical in the way that he attacks the game, and that's kind of how I see Ware. I think he was in a tough situation. He was being recruited by an Arkansas assistant. That assistant then went to Oregon. He commits to Oregon basically because of that assistant's there. That assistant gets the head job at Omaha, and now he's stuck in Oregon, long way away from home, without a real relationship with the head coach. And it kind of showed this season. And so that happens, in college basketball. And now he's got an opportunity at redemption. And I think with the right guidance, Mike Woodson's been where he wants to be for a long time. He can turn himself back into that lottery pick, because with any sort of production this season, he's right back in that conversation. Even with the season that he had, I believe he was still a projected second rounder. So any sort of production this season he has, he's going to be back in that conversation of first round pick. So I'm excited about what he could potentially bring to Indiana. And then you look at Ledlum. As you mentioned, did some extensive film work on him as well. And, he's just that kind of glue guy that he does a little bit of everything well. You mentioned he could play the 3 or the 4. Depending on how Indiana's roster shakes out in this portal, I think he's probably more than likely going to look at the 3 spot for Indiana, just because it really seems, based on who he's recruiting in terms of, Shedrick and Ware and the kid from Marshall that's over 7 feet tall. It looks like they really want to play slot Malik Renew at the starting 4. And so I envision them kind of looking at Ledlum at the 3. Ledlum's a guy that he doesn't have a great 3-point percentage. But something that I wanted to point out, and I pointed out in my Twitter thread, was, he was 27 or 28% last season, but a lot of his 3-point attempts were off the dribble, late in the shot clock, when he essentially had to make a play because he was Harvard's best playmaker. I don't think he has to do that this season. From spot up perspective, he was 35% from the 3-point arc. And so he's just that glue guy that can do a lot. He can rebound, he can score, he can attack with both hands. I'm excited about what he could potentially bring as well.
One question I guess I just have in general, and wanted to get your opinion on, when we saw a lot of these teams who made deep tournament runs, we saw it with Miami when Indiana played them. It wasn't a great matchup for Indiana because Miami had some elite athletes on the wing. They had guys who could really, switch and guard multiple positions. They had different ways to kind of score and attack. And I know that those guys are super valuable and they're not like readily available in the portal. My question with playing, hypothetical, this is all hypothetical because these guys haven't committed, but if you're going to go with a lineup that has had Chris Ledlum at the 3, do you think that's going to be a versatile enough look when you go against some of these teams that have more versatility on the wing? I mean, he looks like obviously a solid athlete. I don't know what your opinion is in terms of defensively, how he moves laterally and all that. I just wonder, with where the game is going, does he kind of fit in the mold of a more modern 3, or is this still kind of a throwback to what we've seen the past few years? Obviously, probably more athletic than Miller Kopp, but I think one thing people kind of noticed in the tournament, especially against a team like Miami, was they just seemed quicker and faster at the key positions, particularly on the wing.
I've gone back and forth on that because I've had people ask me that as well. I think Malik Renew obviously is more of a below the rim player, but I do think he's got some athleticism and kind of just some development to go there. Like, it still looks, he kind of still has that baby face, and just his body hasn't fully developed him into what he can be. So I do think Malik Renew in time can be a pretty athletic 4. Obviously, if you get a Ware or a Shedrick at the 5, very, very athletic there, and can kind of make up for some deficiencies in being able to guard those wings if you've got a guy with such great length protecting the rim, and that can also get out and guard. And I've watched some film on Ware, and he can play drop coverage and still block a fadeaway from 15 feet with just the length that he's got. And so from a Ledlum, I don't know why I can't say that, perspective, he's athletic. He can get out and go, and he can guard basically 2 through 4. Now, is he going to be the best defender at the wing? Probably not, but he can get out and score. He's got a great first step, and he is a go-getter when it comes to rebounding the basketball. I think he had one of the best defensive rebounding percentages in the country last season. Now, obviously, that's at the Ivy League, which is a fine league. It's obviously not Power 6 or anything of that sort, but that's where IU kind of, to me, speed was certainly an issue against Miami, but so was just like toughness. And I know that's a kind of a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot. But I felt like Miami got all the 50-50 balls, and they were just kind of the tougher team. And that Indiana was more of like that finesse kind of, squad. And so I think Ledlum brings that kind of toughness. Like, I'm going to go get that rebound. You're not going to out rebound me. Things like that. So, and then, if you get Xavier Johnson back, obviously that helps as well. So I've gone back and forth because I share some of those concerns too of like, is somebody like him at the 3 going to get you to a Final Four? I don't know, but I think that he can put the ball in the bucket enough, and Indiana needs some guys like that it can make up for some deficiencies you might have on the other end.
Yeah, I still think the other thing Indiana needs is just a wing scorer that's more of a knockdown shooter. And I think one of the guys, obviously, we've started to hear about, Dalton Connect, who really kind of came out of nowhere in terms of his high school profile. You look, he started out at the junior college level, was a junior college All-American, goes to Northern Colorado, had a pretty solid first year there, and then last year really kind of took off and was one of the better players in that league. I think it was the Big Sky, correct me if I'm wrong, was the league that in Northern Colorado is. But you look at him on film, and he obviously is a very polished player in terms of his ability to make 3-point shots. I guess a two-parter here. One, is that like he and maybe Nick Timberlake are kind of similar in that regard of just kind of getting a knockdown shooter, something that Indiana hasn't had. I kind of remember back to the days where Crean had his good teams or having 3-point shooters like around Yogi, like Robert Johnson and Nick Zeisloff, just guys that can knock down shots. That's kind of something I feel like would be a smart thing to surround Xavier Johnson with next season. And those two guys kind of immediately come to mind. I guess, do you agree that India needs somebody like that? And then specifically with Connect, what did you see with him on film that really stood out?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think wing scoring was obviously something Indiana tremendously lacked this past season. And, it's kind of you look at like a UConn, and obviously I'm not saying Indiana is going to be the national champion next season or anything like that if they get a good wing scorer, but it certainly helps to matter. And to be honest, from just an absolute skill perspective, Dalton Connect is probably my favorite player I've done extensive diving into, just from a sheer production standpoint. Like obviously Ware has the most potential high upside, possible lottery pick. Ledlum is just a very solid, like I said, glue guy, does a lot of things very well. But Connect is can put the ball in the bucket, and he's a high level athlete. He can score off the bounce. He can come off of the pick and roll, and he can take one dribble and send it home. He's very skilled from deep and can shoot off the dribble from deep and also catch and shoot, which is where I think he could really thrive at IU. I picture him on the opposite side, the opposite wing, as Xavier Johnson's coming off a ball screen, and maybe his man helps and he can kick out there, or maybe he's on the ball side or the strong side and IU sets a ball screen. Let's say it's Ware rolls, his Connect's man helps and Connect can lift, and you got him for a 3 there. There's a lot of options with a guy like him He's also stands, I think, 6'6", maybe. And so has good size, good length. Where there are some deficiencies there is I watched Northern Colorado. I watched about 4 of their games. They did not play a lick of defense at all. And so that part of it would be a struggle, I think, at least an opportunity for him to grow. Now I put this to somebody in Twitter too, because they're like, his defense was bad. And I don't disagree. But he's got the length and athleticism to be viable if he's taught and he's in the right system. So I don't foresee him being, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year or anything like that, but I think he can take a step up on the defensive end just with proper guidance and in the right system. And then, having some length and athleticism to him to where, just with a little bit of effort might be able to be a little bit of a better defender than he had to be at Northern Colorado. So I love his game, especially offensively. I think it translates well to the Big Ten level because he can score in ball screens, he can score in spot up opportunities, and he's athletic. And so I think that all those three mesh well to, obviously you're not going to see the 23 points per game or anything like that, but I think his production can stay high because a lot of what he does can translate to a Power 6 level.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opinion on a lot of these guys. I'd rather have somebody that can make shots from the perimeter and that you can mold into kind of what you want them to be defensively in your system. There are some obviously, some traits that you have to be a above average defender. But I think most guys just with effort and positioning and being smart about it can be molded into at least be an average defender. And in most college systems, you kind of become what the system emphasizes, right? If your team's going to be just trying to outscore people, as we've seen with some of Iowa's teams over the years, there's not going to be as much emphasis placed on defense. And I can remember, Nick Zeisloff came to Indiana. A lot of people wondered if he could guard anybody. And then in the round of 32 game against Kentucky, he's out there playing against Jamal Murray and these other guys and more than holding his own. So it's not like it can't be done. Miller Kopp is another player who I think a lot of people said he wasn't a good defender when he came to Indiana. And I think he showed a lot of growth and got a lot better on that end of the court. So if I can get a guy that can make shots consistently from the perimeter and bring him in and get him to buy into like what I'm trying to do defensively, I'd much rather have that than an athlete who can defend but can't shoot at all. We kind of saw how that worked under Archie Miller, and it didn't work very well, right?
I'm in full agreement. And Kopp is a great example because of, he's a guy that put the time in to learn the system, learn the scouts, tried to take away, players' strengths when he guarded them, was always in the right position defensively, which is a huge aspect of team defense. And then, like I said, if you're a guy that struggles with on-ball defense, he would a guy like Connect would probably be guarding, the worst wing. And then if you're a guy that struggles on the ball, if you've got a guy like Ware back there to help clean things up, or like Trace Jackson Davis was for Indiana last couple of years, it helps solve a lot of those problems you've got as well. So I'm of the opinion, same as you, like get guys that can score and you can try to plug them into a defensive system that you've built with some other guys and see how that goes.
Yeah, and one thing people I think forget too, last season, one reason Indiana's defense did take a step back was Xavier Johnson wasn't out there for the meat of the schedule, and he's as disruptive on the ball of a defender as there is in the Big Ten. And, I think his absence really hurt Indiana last season. So assuming he's able to come back, I think he can also kind of make up for some of the other deficiencies that you have at other positions. I wanted to ask you quickly just about the outgoing transfers in terms of the guys who are leaving Indiana. Logan Duncan mentioned him, Jordan Geronimo, and Tamar Bates. And I've looked at a couple of these transfer portal ranking lists, and I've not seen Duncan, obviously. I don't think I've seen Jordan Geronimo. I think Tamar Bates was 65th, I think, on 24/7. I didn't check the Athletic. That kind of gives you an idea of maybe how these guys are perceived from the outside. Were any of those guys leaving a surprise to you, or is there a situation with any of those three where you could see, a year from now, 2 years from now, that you see, oh man, I really wish that player would have stuck around. He could have really helped Indiana. Or do you think in all those cases that both the player maybe in Indiana are going to be better off in the long haul, kind of with the split up here.
I think the mutual parting ways with all of them made a lot of sense. Even I think back in January, if you had to guess three guys that will leave, you probably would have guessed those three, just based on production and things like that. With Geronimo, he'd been in the portal a couple of times and had chosen to come back to Indiana, or I don't know if he went in the portal last year, but it's kind of rumored he was maybe looking around at Providence. And then, it just, I feel like, I don't want to say a disservice was done, but he worked on being a three all last off season, and this is not what he is. He doesn't have the lateral movement, the instincts to be able to guard wings. And then, in terms of being able to attack the cup as a scoring wing, like not really a skill that I ever saw him acquiring, once he was here. So I don't want to say disservice was done, because he wanted to be a three. The staff gave him an opportunity to showcase that and learn those skills, but it was kind of a moot off season for him last year, because then this season he was a four all year basically. And Malik Renew came in, played well. By the end of the year, Caleb Banks was really getting kind of some backup 4 minutes over him. So it made a lot of sense for him to move on. He'd given Indiana 3 good years. He was a very important piece in, the NCAA tournament last season to beat Wyoming, and I think in the Big Ten tournament against Michigan. And just find a new opportunity where he can kind of showcase his skill set a little bit more, maybe get some starting minutes somewhere. So that made a lot of sense. Logan Duncombe, never really got an opportunity to see what he could do. Was always kind of a mystery guy, I think he had a good game against, was it Franklin College? Or it wasn't Franklin College. It was one of the first, one of the exhibition games against an NAI or a D3 squad. And, that got some people excited, but again, it's not against high level competition. And then, injured, sick, whatever the case may be a lot. So kind of a mystery man. But it made a lot of sense for him just to kind of find a new situation and get a fresh start. And he's going back home to Xavier. So good for him. The one that, I could see there being some production down the road is Tamar Bates. And I had mentioned this somewhere previously, and it might have been on here, where he had such a weird freshman year that you could almost call it a wash, in that this past season was kind of his freshman season. And a lot of those guys make that jump between their freshman and sophomore years. And so you could almost say this off season is when he'd be a little bit more comfortable. His daughter's now 1. He can focus on, basketball and getting better and getting better confidence. Cause I've never thought it was for lack of skill with Tamar Bates. It was always looked more mental and confidence, especially when things went wrong for him. And so I think a fresh start for him and being able to get some confidence going can be big for him. And like I said, kind of envision this as like his sophomore leap, even though it's obviously going to be his junior year, perhaps. But he wasn't productive at Indiana, and it made sense for a fresh start there too. So he's the one that I could see like, man, that probably is somebody that could play at a high level. I look at him at IMG and things like that, and he was extremely skilled. I even looked back at, some St. John's film from early on in his freshman season, and it's almost crazy the amount of confidence he played with and how well he played versus where you look at some of his later stage games at IU. It almost looked like a completely different player. I mean, he was making floaters in the lane and creating off the ball screens, and really by the end of his IU tenure, he was pretty much a spot up shooter. And so I could see him making a jump, and I hope he does. He deserves that. And I think if he puts the work in, he can get that. But at the end of the day, like I said, those are the 3 that I would have picked. We're probably going to move on. IU doesn't lose a lot of production, as you mentioned, not really highly rated in portal rankings or anything like that. And, if you look at, if IU lands some of these guys that we talked about previously versus what's outgoing, I think you end up with a net positive probably. So, that's kind of the name of the game, the transfer portal. You want to end up with the net positive. And so it'd be something interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah, quickly on all three guys. I mean, just dunk them. It's never a good thing. Like when the highlight of your career is basically the lead into this your second season. Where I remember back to media day last year, there was like this big kind of topic that where Trace or Race talked about him at the podium and said he was having a really good preseason, and it was one of those things where I thought to myself, like, we wrote something about it in the preseason, and I was like, if this is the most we talk about Logan Duncombe all season, that he has not had kind of a good season, and it ended up being the case where it was basically just like it almost felt like they were trying to get some positive momentum and keep him kind of engaged, and he never really, whether, like you said, whether he was sick or whether he was injured, he never really was able to kind of break through the rotation. I'm not exactly sure what his place is going to be at Xavier, because when I watched them this past season, I mean, they had grown men playing in the paint and playing up front, and I don't envision him being able to kind of step in and do that. But best of luck to him. He's always, I found him to be a really nice kid that was, for the most part, just obviously just wanted to be at Indiana through the coaching change, and decided to stay on. So good luck to him. In terms of Geronimo, kind of the same thing. We heard all off season, he's going to play the three, and I'm like, have you watched him play? He can't really dribble the ball. You can't play the three if you can't dribble. It's nothing against Jordan Geronimo. He was also recruited by the previous coaching staff, but you know, he's basically an energy four man off the bench, I think, at this level. And if he wants to move down a level or go somewhere else where he's going to get a better opportunity, I think that's a smart thing. And with Bates, even when you look at the overall numbers improving this year, if you really look dig down deep into his Ken Palm numbers and look at like what he did against Tier A and Tier B competition, his 3-point and 2-point shooting numbers are really, really bad. And so, he played well early in the season against maybe some lesser competition, but then when the lights got brighter and the competition was better, really outside of that Michigan State game, there was nothing on the resume. So I think for him too, I agree with you, getting a change of scenery and getting a chance maybe to get a fresh start somewhere else, maybe playing a little bit of a different system. I think kind of with all these guys, it's like they just need to play, right? Like you kind of get into the situation where you have certain guys that can come off the bench and be effective in a role and kind of grow. But all three of those guys to me just seem like they need more reps and more opportunities. So I think they're going to get that somewhere else. Whereas Indiana's a program right now, Mike Woodson's entering his third season. There's expectations to continue to kind of progress. And I don't know what the chances of Indiana being a better team next year, kind of with what they're losing. But I think the bare minimum expectation is getting to the tournament again next season. And in order to do that, I think they had to obviously upgrade it at some of those spots. And I think that's exactly what they're doing. So, Tony, it's always good to talk to you, despite the fact that I'm a White Sox fan and you're dressed up in your Cubs gear, but we can be friends on the baseball front here for 45 minutes on the show.
Perfect. I always appreciate being on, Alex. Pleasure talking some hoops with you, and hopefully, next time we talk, Indiana's roster will be a little bit more set in stone.
Yeah. Who knows when that'll be? Could be a couple more days, could be a couple more weeks. Who knows? It could. I mean, the crazy thing about this portal is it doesn't even close for entries until May 11th. So I keep telling people we're still early in the process. The next thing I feel like we're going to have is some of these portal guys are going to go to their next school, and then at the school they go to, someone's going to say, this guy's taking my spot, and now I got to go somewhere else. So that's going to be the next wave. There's going to be a ton of commitments, and then there's going to be guys at the schools that they're going to say, all right, I thought I was going to be your guy next year. I'm not. So now I'm going to go somewhere else. So it's very, it's even crazier to me than NBA free agency, right? Because you've got 1,000 players over that instead of the NBA is, there's contracts involved. This is kind of the Wild West. So fun to track. Probably not as fun for coaches to track, but we'll be tracking it all at Inside the Hall. Follow Tony on Twitter. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating on Spotify. We'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.